It's the most magical time of the year, and I'm not talking about Christmas. I'm talking about the NFL season. So make sure you're ready with NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV. Get the most live NFL games all in one place. Right now, you can save $85 when you bundle NFL Sunday Ticket with YouTube TV. Sign up today at youtubetv.com/Spotify. Device and content restrictions apply. Discount applied to first 4 months of YouTube TV, then $72.99 a month. Ends August 29th. Terms, restrictions, and embargoes apply. No refunds.
It's been a 3-year wait, but the Olympics are back, and the CBS Sports Podcast Network has you covered with everything happening in Paris. It's a new era for the U.S. women's national team, and Attacking Third will tackle all the women's soccer action. First Cut will keep close tabs on golf, while Beyond the Arc will follow the U.S. men's basketball team on a quest for another gold. And We Need to Talk Now will provide comprehensive coverage of women's athletes at the Olympic Games. Follow and listen to all CBS Sports podcasts for free on the Odyssey app and wherever you get your podcasts.
The Moth Podcast shares incredible true stories told live. And for our next episode, we're going for gold.
As I made my way around the track with my American teammates in a crowd of 100,000 people, as if they were the only ones in the stadium, I saw my parents.
3 stories all about the Olympics. This special episode's available right now. Subscribe to the Moth Podcast to make sure you hear it.
Hey everyone, I'm Kavitha Davidson, and welcome back to Sportly. This week, we're actually going to switch some things up. Instead of our usual historical deep dive, we're going to bring you a conversation with a fellow sports writer, journalist, author, and friend. I love this woman a lot, Jessica Luther. Jessica Luther is an investigative journalist, author, and podcaster whose work has really significantly shaped the discourse around sports and gendered violence. Her writing has been featured in major outlets like ESPN The Magazine, The New York Times Magazine, and Sports Illustrated. Jessica's most impactful reporting includes groundbreaking investigations into Baylor University's football program and its handling of sexual misconduct, the Dallas Mavericks workplace culture, and also sexual harassment, and LSU's mishandling of sexual harassment cases. This is all work that, she has been a dogged reporter on and broken some of these stories, and sports are slightly safer for women and everyone else because of her work. And this is work that has earned her an Associated Press Sports Editor Award in 2020. She's the author of the critically acclaimed book Unsportsmanlike Conduct, College Football, and the Politics of Rape. And of course, we had the pleasure of co-authoring a book together, Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back. It will forever be one of my proudest moments and accomplishments, no matter what I end up doing in the rest of my career. But it will always be a source of great pride that I can say I co-wrote a book with Jessica. In addition to her writing, Jessica also co-hosted the feminist sports podcast Burn It All Down during its 5+ year run. And she is currently pursuing a PhD in physical culture and sports studies at the University of Texas. So Jessica, welcome to Sportly, and thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here with you, Kavitha.
How are you doing? Catch us up. What's going on? How's the PhD coming?
I am writing. I feel like today I can say I wrote something earlier today. So it's going well. It's a really fun project that I like a lot. And writing's hard, but I try to remind myself all the time that I do really enjoy doing this.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, just give us a brief recap of what your field of study is and what your thesis is on.
Yeah, so I'm getting my PhD in sports studies, and I'm writing basically a history dissertation about the the University of Texas women's basketball team in the 1970s. And I'm interested in sort of race and gender and really the beginning of the professionalization of women's collegiate sports as we understand it today, and using UT and the women's basketball team there as like this microcosm to say bigger things about what was happening at that time and why it still matters.
And do you think UT does offer that like really good lens for, the programs throughout the country?
Yeah. I mean, it was such a powerhouse almost out the door, but also faced all of the same sort of barriers that you see all the time. And so it's an interesting space to really think about gender in particular, but also race. Like they had just desegregated athletics in the mid 60s, but the football team, which I'm famous for, was 1970.
Wow.
As late as 1969, the southernmost teams in the SEC were still completely white. On September 12, 1970, USC met Alabama on Legion's Field for what would become the first integrated college football game played in Alabama.
And part of my project is about the first female Black athlete, varsity athlete at the University of Texas, because she played basketball. So I'm interested in the way that race is being desegregated at the same time that gender is being heavily segregated within sport, and sort of how power is moving around all of those things. And UT is just, it's like chef's kiss for all the things that you can say about that, using it as the example.
Well, I can't wait for you to finish, which I'm sure you hear a lot.
Me too. I'm excited to finish it as well.
One of my favorite parts about following you during this part of your academic career is all of the really fun ephemera you come across in your research. What are some of the more notable newspaper clippings or some of the finds that you've had?
Gosh, there's this amazing, so Title IX is 1972, which is the federal law that basically mandates that educational institutions have to have equity in sport. And the NCAA figures out around 1974, and that's only for men at that point, the NCAA. And around 1974, the Title IX might be a problem for them, and they start to really, they sue, and they really try to do lots of things to destroy it. And there are women trying very hard for it to not be destroyed. And this one woman goes to a convention, and I can't remember. I wish, God, I should look this up before we did this. But the AP wrote an article, and it was like, "Woman Speaks" is like the title of the entire article. It's so frank and so to the point. But one of my favorite things in the whole world, I hate it, but I also love it, is like the misogyny is just on the surface all the time. So the sports columnists don't really hold back. They don't have any reason to. There's no sort of guardrails around misogyny in sport at that time. And they will just say the wildest stuff. And a lot of them are still alive. And I have to really tell myself that it's probably not appropriate to contact them to ask them about their misogynistic 1975 college column about women's sport. I mean, just, gosh, there was this one, great one that was like, imagine the year is 2002. And it's like this post-apocalyptic hellscape where like women's sports are too big and it's like destroyed everything and how sad everyone is. It was just weird, but there is something funny about it, even if there's enough echo with today that it's also very sad.
Right. Right. How we've come so far, but not really as far as we'd like to think.
Yes, absolutely.
That's fascinating. I wanted to ask you about, so much of your work has been really just dogged investigation, a lot of time filing through police reports and legal records and all of that. Take us behind the scenes for our listeners, and what is your reporting process like when you are tackling something like a Baylor story, which you broke with your good friend and writing partner Dan Solomon? That's obviously the work that is impactful and moves the needle. Media consumer or news consumer might not understand just how that process works and how much work actually goes into something like that. So can you kind of describe what your process is?
Yeah, it's long. It's so much longer. I even forget how long it is. It's almost like giving birth, where like you do it again because you forget what it was like the first time. I only gave birth once. I did not forget, but takes forever is my experience. When the Harvey Weinstein story finally broke and everyone was like, why did this take so long? I was not surprised that it took that long, especially once you found out like how powerful he was and sort of the threats that he was doing. So something like the Baylor story, which is almost 9 years old. So that was a long time ago, but I was tipped and we went and got all the documentation that we possibly could get, talked to a ton of off the record sources. There was a court case. So we went to the court and waited for people to say stuff that we wanted to put in there. It's a lot of document collection. I went to the county jail to request a record. I tried to talk to the DA by just showing up in Waco. It's a lot of reaching out to the authorities at Baylor, asking for interviews. I mean, we had hundreds of documents for that one, but mainly because the DA had already collected it. But yeah, we did that initial story, and then we did a 2-year long follow-up at RIP Deadspin.
Right.
That took us the many, many years. And it was just interviewing as many survivors as we could find, which I want to be really sensitive, asking people to tell those stories. You work a long time to do the research, to write the story, and then you go through an incredibly intensive editing process. We just, as a culture, do not believe people who come forward about this stuff. And I think that's as true in journalism as it is anywhere else. I've worked with mainly incredible editors, but like still, you have to prove your case over and over again to a degree that when you are not writing on this topic, right? Sometimes the editing process is just so long. It is so hard to get through. So yeah, it takes a ton of work. You really have to dot your I's and cross your T's in a way that I haven't experienced with other work. And I'm happy to do it. And I think I'm good at it. And I will do the fact check. I will do the lawyer check. I will do all the things. I want it to be tight. I want to do the best possible work that I can. But I think people would be surprised at just how much literal time it is from beginning to end.
Yeah. And how thankless it can sometimes be.
I always say that maybe 40% of what I know makes it in.
Yeah. You and I have had this conversation. The things that we know about certain men that we have not just been able to publish, but know them to be
true. You
true.
can't corroborate it. I'm not going to publish it if I can't corroborate it. That doesn't mean that I don't believe it.
Or if a victim or survivor changes their mind, you have to respect that. There's so much that goes into it.
There's so many things that happen. And yeah, so when you read an investigative story, you should assume that that's probably actually maybe 40% of the actual story itself.
A lot of restraint necessary, journalistic restraint.
And it's hard because like if I went on ESPN in the wake of Baylor and stuff like that, I have to like really remember, what did we publish? What did we not publish? Like I have to reread my own stuff to be like, okay, this is what is in the public sphere. This is what we were able to corroborate and put on the page versus what I actually know.
Let's talk about some things that are going on in sports. I know you, as I do, have huge problems. There's a whole chapter in our book about this with the Olympics, but we also immensely love them. And it's the probably purest distillation of that dilemma that runs throughout our entire book. So what were your thoughts of Paris 2024? Obviously, there were some really great moments. There were some really controversial moments. We're still dealing with this Jordan Childs fallout with the bronze medal. Where does your mind go when you look back on Paris?
It was really good. There's such a part of me that feels bad even saying that out loud. And I'll just say off the top, there was phenomenal reporting by Dave Zirin and Jules Boykoff on the ground in Paris on all of the issues around like moving the unhoused and all the sort of environmental things that are in play. So really important work at the nation. It's good and important. And the Olympics as a entity are bad. The athletics of the Olympics are an absolute joy. And the athletes were amazing. And I feel like there were 1,000 things that I saw that were spectacular. I watched the end of the women's road race cycling event that Kristen Faulkner won, I don't know, 6 times. Like they crossed the Seine together. She's with these 3 other women and they cross the Seine and she's got, 2 kilometers left and she just takes off. And these are like 3 of the best cyclists in the world and they cannot go with her. Like, I don't understand how she did that. Like I watched the end of the women's marathon 3 times. I feel like I probably watched every sport in some way. My favorite thing was the kayak cross. Did you watch this?
It was new in Paris, right? This was the first, and it was really fun.
Look at the time right now for Jess Fox. She's got to hold it together. Penalty free so far. She's got the lead by a big amount. Can she hold on here all the way to the end? Here's Jess Fox. She's going to put the strokes.
It was a blast. And it was like the BMX cross or the snowboard cross where it's like 4 kayakers. They dropped them off a platform. It was wild. They fell like 10 feet into the water and then they like battled to like get down to the finish line first. I giggled through almost that entire thing. I watched every single race. So I just think the athletic part of it was spectacular. Like you mentioned, the Jordan Childs stuff was really hard. I mean, I think really sad for all the gymnasts involved, especially Jordan. especially with the racism that she faced on top of everything else. Everything around the boxers and ideas about gender were very difficult. There's always moments in the Olympics, anytime that men and women are both competing, where you're reminded that women are treated very differently within sports, even if this was the gender parity. Shireen Ahmed, my very good friend from Burn It All Down, repeatedly brought up the fact that if you were a French woman who wears a hijab, you were not allowed to wear it as part of your delegation because France has this rule. The IOC and should have told them that they're not allowed to enforce it during the Olympics. Isn't it like the IOC, the Olympic area becomes under the IOC's jurisdiction and not like under the country's jurisdiction? So like IOC
It's like international waters, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the IOC rules would supersede in cases like that, but they did not force France to follow their rules.
Well, IOC leadership is also very French. So
fair. So, gender parity, like what does that really mean when only certain athletes and we were reminded of that multiple times over with this Olympic cycle. So there's always the good and the bad, but there was a lot of good.
There was a lot of good, and it felt kind of cathartic, especially after Tokyo had to be postponed and having everything be kind of muted because of COVID. And Richard Deitch said this. He said it might have been the best Olympics that we've ever had.
Yeah. But then it was also like, how did you feel when Noah Lyles ran that race? I knew before I watched it late. I watched it on the primetime with my husband who never knows anything. So he had no idea what he was watching. But I knew he had COVID before we watched the race.
After the race, we saw Noah Lyles being carried off in a wheelchair. He was wearing a mask as well at one point, talking to media. And USA Track and Field have confirmed that he had tested positive for COVID 2 days ago.
I really had intellectualized it. I was like, okay, if I was an athlete, this is my entire life, my whole career, all of my identity, I might make that same choice that he made. But then afterwards, when he's like breathing on other athletes and on the medical staff, and I was like, I got so mad at him.
Yeah.
And I was mad at the institution that didn't do anything about it. But like, that was a very bad moment for the IOC and, Lyles in particular, but he was just just an example of the overall issue around COVID at this games that sort of was just brushed aside because we were all so excited about what we were watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think I agree with you where I do understand his decision-making. Whenever you interview Olympians, I interviewed a few of them after Tokyo was postponed, and it's the thing that they've trained their whole life for. You understand the motivation, you understand they put their heart and soul into this, but it still felt gross. Like it felt gross. It felt really unsafe. It was really irresponsible. We were not talking enough about the fact that he was living with his girlfriend, who was also an Olympic athlete and was sleeping next to him and could very well have gotten sick herself. There's a lot there. And I don't quite understand how there wasn't testing, how this was allowed to happen. There's a lot of questions that still need to be answered from this.
We won't ever get those answers.
No, we will not.
We'll all just move on to whatever's next.
I am glad that you did bring up the boxers because, you and I have had a lot of conversations both offline and online. We've talked about this in our book about trans athletes. And obviously, neither of these boxers are trans. And apparently we have to keep just saying that out loud, that they are both women. But this brought up a whole lot of issues about trans athletes and gender identity. And Imane is now suing a lot of people, and good for her. And I hope she gets all of the money. But what were your reactions? At some point, we just see the same conversations over and over again, and they never kind of move forward.
Yeah, I was mad about it mainly. I, again, just feel really terrible for these athletes. And it was also convoluted because... was it the IBA? What was the boxing organization that said they had done the testing, but they were all corrupt, run by a Russian oligarch? They won't say anything about the actual testing. So there's a lot of implication.
This organization is no longer part of the Olympics. In fact, it was kicked out of the Olympics over the fact that this IBA boxing organization is essentially run by the Russian government. The IOC is adamant that she's eligible to compete and that she is a woman.
We had this moment where we got to see people who want to believe certain things, like just grab onto them as soon as they're given any opportunity. And women are always just on the edge of like not being allowed to compete in sports, right? There's always a reason that they shouldn't be. They take up too much space. They take up too much money. They're too masculine. They're always just right there on the edge of not being allowed to compete as it is.
They're too masculine, but we're also going to yell at you for wearing fake eyelashes and having a bomb set of nails.
You're not taking it seriously enough.
Right.
It's endless. And this is such a hard one to talk about because like you said, you feel the need to say they're women. They're not trans.
Mm-hmm.
And that on some level makes me feel bad too, because I am pro-inclusion, hill I'm willing to die on. I think there's enough space here. And I think that this is constantly like a solution looking for a problem, just baked in transphobia. So I don't know that people would have shown up for them had they been trans. And that's the part that I think is really difficult about this. But we just got to see all the worst impulses of the way that race intersects with gender. You know, women of color absolutely are seen as more masculine. This absolutely bleeds onto white women, but it's absolutely women of color who take the brunt of that kind of feminizing that's like necessary in order for people to feel like these women should be allowed to play sports. That's so weird. Like, it's weird to even say that out loud. Like, what a weird marker we've created. So yeah, it sucked. It sucked. It was sucky for those women. It really revealed so much about how easily we will all move into transphobic spaces and how easily sports allows that to happen. It seemed good in the way that so many people pushed back very hard, very fast in support of these women. That part of it felt good. Again, some of that would even dip into transphobia because there's like, well, they're not trans, so we're allowed to like them.
Right.
But I don't know. There's an amazing podcast that just came out. Rose Eveleth hosted it, called Tested. In the US, it's NPR's Embedded feed is where you would find it, all about gender testing in sports and the Olympics. And like, sadly, really, really on topic for these Olympics, but it's brilliant. Like, if you feel like you don't really have a grasp on this topic and you want to understand the history behind it and like the real world impact on athletes who face the brunt of this, Tested it's so good.
My last thing I did want to ask you about for the Olympics, as a white woman in sports academia, thoughts on ray gun and breakdancing?
Oh my gosh. 1,000. I have watched literally every TikTok that everyone has made about this. I mean, this was another moment where I was like, my husband will not know anything about this. And he had been looking forward so much to the breakdancing. So I was like, well, let's watch the preliminary rounds. And he is such a nice man. He was trying so hard to be nice, but he was like, I don't understand what's happening. And I was like, correct. I don't really know what to say. I think it's really obvious to all of us that mistakes were made, that there's no part of me that believes that is the best female breakdancer from Australia. It was such a bummer because the breaking was so great.
Yeah.
We watched all of it, men and women, and Ami, who won from Japan, she was phenomenal. Like, I had such a blast watching them compete. I laughed like everyone else did. I had a grand time with it. It was funny, but it like really took away from incredible athletes doing really cool stuff.
We did an episode the week that breaking debuted on kind of the history of breaking. And when breaking was first announced to be added to the Olympic program, I went around to various ciphers in New York. And obviously I'm from here, birthplace of hip hop, birthplace of breaking. And I interviewed a couple of OG breakers like Rockefeller. You know, she was growing up in the Bronx in the 70s. She's a Puerto Rican woman. She spoke a lot about, you know, the appropriation part of it and how torn she is that this sport is a sport and is getting all of this attention, but that when you look at the international stage, there aren't a whole lot of people who look like the people who originated this art form and cultural form of expression and all of that. So, you know, I think it's interesting. I feel like we have to point out that we will not have breaking in LA in 2028, but that has nothing to do with how breaking fared now that Olympic program had already been set. It was cool to see for sure. And as you said, we saw some phenomenal athletes. I would like to see more of this, but I think we also need better commentators because I think the contextualization of things. And like, I'm not going to purport to be a breaking expert by any means. I actually have a couple of friends who very much are. But even small things, like even if we're not talking about race and gender, if having commentators who can break down what various moves are and how difficult that actually is, because if you don't know any sport, right? If you don't know any sport, you're not going to be able to view it and to understand and respect how difficult it actually is. So I think that we need, I would like to see more commentators who can kind of provide that context.
Yeah, I felt like that was one area that with NBC that was really interesting this time because sometimes they were phenomenal. You know, we watched a ton of indoor volleyball.
Mm-hmm.
What a great team. Incredible chemistry. Always felt like I understood what was happening. And then you would turn on another sport and you'd be like, what? Like, you have endless resources, NBC. This is like your entire money bag. Like, how come I don't understand what I'm watching?
I will say Lori Hernandez is a treasure.
Oh, she was a phenomenal.
She loves her sport also. Like, that really comes through. I think it doesn't always work out when you have athletes as commentators, but this was absolutely a case where her insight was fantastic.
I bet she's put in so many hours of training and it does not come off like that at all, which makes me think she's done way more than I even can imagine. Yeah, she was an absolute delight.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
School is back, and Dick's Sporting Goods has what you need to win your year. We've got everything from cleats to Sambas, dunks, and more. Plus, the hottest looks from Nike, Jordan, and Adidas. Find your first day fits in-store or online at dicks.com.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. When you test drive the all-new Prologue EV, there's a lot that can impress you about it. There's the class-leading passenger space, the clean, thoughtful design, and the intuitive technology. But out of everything, what you'll really love most is that it's a Honda. Visit honda.com/EV to see offers.
Well, let's move on. You know, obviously, there's so much that we can talk about in the world of sports, as there always is. But, you know, we're in a moment right now where women's basketball is thriving. And it's fantastic to see. You know, you and I are both longstanding supporters of women's sports and women athletes. And, you know, there was a sentiment recently that the WNBA is better than the NBA, the quality of the product. And some of us have maybe been saying that for many years. So how do you feel about this moment in women's sports, in women's basketball? You know, we keep hearing this is a movement, not a moment, right? This isn't a temporary thing. This isn't just because of Caitlin Clark. And by the way, Caitlin Clark having the time off from the Olympics seems to have done her a whole lot of good because she looks great right now. So yeah, just your reactions to the first half of the WNBA and some of the conversations that we've been seeing.
It's been spectacular. I mean, we had such a run in the college season to like get us right into the W season. Didn't feel like it fell off at all, which was kind of remarkable. It's kind of wild. It's always weird to be first to something that then blows up and you're like, welcome. And I don't want to be snarky about it. Like, I'm really excited that there are a lot of new people experiencing it. I mean, on some level, it's hard. It's hard to listen to the narratives. The W's always been great. Like, it was difficult when Caitlin was not great, that she struggled when she first got into the league because, of course, she did. These are like the best basketball players in the world.
And we only have 12 teams of them.
I mean, there's so few.
The distillation, if NBA players are the 1%, just because there's so few roster spots in the WNBA, we're talking about the 0.1% here.
Yeah, it's the hardest sports league in the world. And so that was very difficult. It was like, yeah, of course. The first game she played the Connecticut Sun and they lost. And I was like, yeah, they have Alyssa Thomas. Like, of course, Alyssa Thomas and Dewada Bonner. And
the start of the Fever schedule was very unkind to Caitlin Clark.
Oh, it was so mean.
They played us. They played the Liberty twice in a week and a half, I want to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a super team, right? Like, yeah, it It's amazing. And I love it. I have a shirt that says, I've been watching women's basketball before it was cool.
Mm-hmm.
And when I wear it, people like want to come up to me and talk to me about it. So it's neat that it's like way more in the ether than it's ever been in my life. Like I talked about this with the NBA. I'm not a huge NBA person. Like, no, I'm an absolute playoff like bandwagon. I watch the finals. I don't really know who plays for what teams. I'm always being surprised by finding out that someone is on whatever team. But I was still like have a basic idea because it's just if you follow sports, you just hear about it all the time. And it's so much easier now. Like that will happen to me. Like I haven't watched the W since the Olympics, but like I know that Caitlin Clark has been on a tear. Like I just heard that somewhere.
Osmosis.
Which is like wild. Yeah. So the osmosis of it. So it's been super fun. Yeah. Someone writing hopefully a book on the University of Texas. I'm like, I need them to peak in about 4 years under Vic Schaefer. I think they can do it. They're very, very good. I can't imagine what 15-year-old me would think about this. I mean, women's basketball was a big deal when I was 15, 16 in the mid 90s. But I don't know. I just think it's on a whole other level and it doesn't feel like we're near a peak either.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting when the CBA comes up for negotiation. And, you know, I have obviously loved seeing these women get their flowers, seeing the money flow accordingly, because that always has to happen as well. I have been a little cautious about warning people that sports writers like you and I, who take a very critical lens to sports, we're going to have to point out that women's sports are not immune to the same pitfalls of capitalism and corruption. And, you know, Kathy Engelbert is the commissioner and is a Deloitte alumna. And so everything that comes with that and all of the pitfalls that we see in men's sports are things that we're going to see in women's sports. And the two areas that I've kind of so far pinpointed just to as a warning sign, because, you know, if the W is still relatively in its nascency of being a superstar, high-powered, high-moneyed league, then you can start early to combat some of the issues. So sports betting is one. Again, always follow the money. Anything that we see wrong with sports betting in men's sports, we're going to see with women's sports. We've already started to see it internationally. Tennis and volleyball have some of the most sports betting corruption issues, which is a thing to think about. And then this Dearica Hamby lawsuit is really difficult.
Basketball superstar and Olympian Dearica Hamby looking to take the WNBA and her former team to court, alleging she was traded because she was pregnant.
You know, if listeners haven't been following this, Dearica Hamby basically has accused Las Vegas Aces coach Becky Hammon of cutting her or muting her playing time because she was pregnant, and she had apparently agreed not to be pregnant twice, and the very messy issue. And, you know, I think that this also falls into the realm of just because a league is run by women doesn't mean that the misogyny doesn't still exist. And, you know, obviously we don't know what is true. There's going to be investigations. They've been subpoenaed, all of that. But if that is true, then it's a league run by women that upholds things like maternity rights and childcare rights and healthcare as bastions of the league and its principles. But we are still seeing perhaps, you know, the underlying misogyny and discrimination against mothers and motherhood. And it's a little distressing to see.
Yeah. I think this is always so hard about women's sports because it's always organizationally and institutionally coming up behind men, because women weren't allowed to organize and have sporting institutions for many, many decades. And so I think it makes sense that there's just a recreation of what we have already seen around men. But like men's sports isn't good. Like we spend a lot of time, you and I, we wrote a whole book in a lot of ways about, you know, the negative things that major sporting institutions and organizations do all the time. And they're mainly built around men, right? Like we were talking about the boxers and the Olympics, like men's sports are an exclusionary space and they were built that way. And one of the things that I want to happen so much more in women's sports is I want people to dream bigger, think bigger than what men's sports has offered. And you're right, like we're in the beginning of a lot of things. So This makes me think of like Austin now has an MLS team. We just got one a few years ago. They're building soccer culture here from the ground up. And it's like way more friendly and inclusive because they're on purpose building it that way. And there are moments where stuff bubbles to the surface. But it's really interesting to watch a community like decide, like, this is how we're going to do this. And it's lovely. And so, yeah, like, you think about the NWSL and all of the stuff around abuse within that league. They're just recreating the abusive system that we see all the time in men's sports, but also in our culture at large. And there's got to be other ways to do this. And I know it's terrifying because they are resource poor, money poor compared to the men's sports that they see out there. But man, I wrote this piece after the last Women's World Cup, or 2 cycles ago after France, advocating for women's soccer to leave FIFA. And people like got so bad at me. And I don't really believe women's soccer is going to leave FIFA. FIFA's too powerful and too big and all that sort of stuff. But like, we should really be thinking about it. Like, what could that look like outside of those structures? Because they're not good. They weren't built to include women. They don't include women. They don't care. And yeah, so the W can't just build in the image of the NBA. Like, that's never going to work because the NBA was never built to include women.
Right. Clearly. It's this idea that women can't be bad actors too, right?
Right.
This idea, and obviously that's incredibly false, but you don't want to necessarily be the one that finally, when women athletes are getting their due, to point out some of the areas that their institutions are failing them. Because this, as you said, does feel very fragile still.
I don't really believe it is, but I believe that people think it is. And that can be dangerous too. But I think women's sports is so much more robust. And yeah, they deserve the scrutiny. I want them to have the scrutiny. I want them to be better.
Absolutely. I've kind of heard you answer this question, especially when we were doing book tour stuff, but I'm gonna ask it to you anyway. I get asked this all the time as somebody who critically covers sports. Our dedication in our book is, we love sports and we just want them to do and be better. We wouldn't be in this industry if we didn't love sports. How much are you able to watch sports for fun?
Oh, I watch a ton of sports for fun. I'm one of those Drive to Survive people that's like super into F1 now, which is barely a defensible sport. Like, there is almost nothing about that is defensible. And I just love it. Like, I'm so excited that we're back to race week and I get to watch those boys. Because when I learned about F1, I was like, no woman is ever going to get to be a driver. This was definitely not made to let a woman in. So, I mean, I watched so much of the Olympics, knowing all the issues. And I was like, I still am having a ball. We now have season tickets to the MLS team. And I could talk all day about what I don't like about the MLS as an entity. I don't want to be like separate the art from the artist or something like that. But there is a way that I'm able to try to focus on the athlete. And there's no particular athlete that is a problem for me right now. I don't watch a lot of college football anymore, but like, I watched a lot of bowl games this last year because I was sick. And I watched the Pop-Tart Bowl or whatever. I don't know anything about college football. I couldn't even tell you who won the Heisman last year, which is so bananas to me at this point in my life.
As you have said on other podcasts, but for our listeners, you are someone who chose her college based on their football team.
I literally applied to one college. The only place I wanted to go was Florida State, and that was to watch football, and I did, and we were great. Yeah, I don't really watch anymore, but
is it a compartmentalization thing? Because you think critically and analyze as a professional covering these sports and these institutions. But when you're watching something just for fun, do you shut that part of your brain off? Is that how it works for you?
Yeah, I kind of just acknowledge it. I know this is bad, but I'm just going to enjoy watching.
Right.
And I just kind of shift my brain there. I don't even know if it's compartmentalizing. It's more just like constantly acknowledging that, yeah, I'm participating. This thing is bad. But I think we just do this with so much of the pop culture that we consume.
Oh, totally.
Culture that we consume. I feel like that about federal politics right now. There's lots of ways that I just am like, well, this is bad, but I'm going to participate anyway because, some things is because I enjoy it. Some things because I feel like I have to. But yeah, so sports is just as much that sometimes shitty men show up on my TV screen and I just choose to keep watching so that I can stay watching the show, like you just kind of shrug.
You trudge through it for sure.
Yeah.
Well, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, but I could talk to you about 18 million things for hours on end. Obviously, ownership groups in the NFL are still very much old white men, generational family wealth, teams being passed down. But we are seeing the shift in sports in general of, one, just because most individuals don't have the kind of money that is now required to own a sports team. We're starting to see conglomerates and corporations, and there's a lot of private equity money now going into sports ownership, some good, some bad. But, what are your thoughts on where we are going? And we still don't have a ton of Black owners in sports that are majority Black athletes and those kinds of things. And are we seeing women's sports kind of change that model a little bit?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. This is a hard one too, in the same way that we were talking about women's sports just recreating bad things from men's sports. Like the NFL was not built for people of color to be in charge. Like it's built to be an exploitive system mainly of Black bodies, right? And do you feel like ownership can really change the fundamental setup of that exploitative system? I think maybe on some level, on like how they interact with the players, what the CBAs look like, that sort of stuff.
I think in the NFL in particular, just because you see, like I was absolutely engrossed in Hard Knocks, the Giants edition, the off-season Giants edition this year, and I didn't expect it to be as good and compelling as it was because the Giants had so much control over what was actually aired. But in that, you see how closely John Mara is interacting with his coaches and with his GM. And so I think in football in particular, in those sense, we always talk about the Rooney Rule and we talk about guys hiring guys that look like them and that they're comfortable with and that they, go golfing with and that kind of thing. So I think in that sense, that part of the trickle down effect does work, but we are still talking about institutions and systems, and those are not really things that individuals and individual actions can change.
So obviously college football is not pro football. Like you're dealing very different. Well, one day it'll eventually be employees, but to the point now, however many years ago, a decade ago, I don't even remember, when UT had Charlie Strong as their first and only Black head coach, that felt different to me. Like I ended up going, and I wrote a piece about this for Vice Sports, also RIP, about the clinic that he did for women's football clinic. And I thought it was going to be condescending and patronizing, and I actually loved it. And it made me really respect him a lot because he respected us so much. But like one thing I remember from that is they had a panel where the players could talk to the women who had come to the clinic, and they really gave those players a lot of space. Like you could tell that they felt free to talk about their actual experiences because they were not all positive, for sure. And there were coaches in the room. And I thought, oh, this feels different to me. And I remember his players crying when they fired him. So I definitely think that there's something with like what could change when a Black man is in charge of one of these teams. But Charlie Strong was also fired because the way that the college football system is set up is if you're not winning in a very particular way, especially at an institution like Texas, you cannot stick around no matter how much your players love you.
Right.
And how much they feel like you are doing good for them. That is not the measure of success. And that's where I'm like, it's hard for me to see these things actually changing on the ground for all the people hiring who they know. But even if they actually did change, it's hard to understand and know like how much those people could even change the system that is so moneyed and ingrained and just like a rolling tank that squashes everything that it comes in contact with. And I think that's what's always so hard about all this stuff is like, I think that people should change. I think they should be more diverse. I think that's necessary and important, and we should continue to push for that all the time, constantly. And then once that changes, that's going to be a whole nother level of pressure. You have to keep changing, even once the personnel changes. That's just the beginning step.
Again, I always go back to, when we set out to write our book, the original title was How to Love Sports When They Don't Love You Back. And then we just realized very early on that we can't we can't give those recommendations. We can only describe the problems and how various different fans cope and their coping mechanisms. But sometimes there aren't easy solutions, and that's one of the more frustrating parts of our job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jessica, I love you so much. I could talk to you for hours. I am so happy to have you on, our first interview guest on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much.
And this was, of course, a great conversation. I knew we were going to get into it about the Olympics because you and I love the Olympics so much.
Really do.
And they're so problematic.
such a problem.
Thank you for joining us. And thank you so much at home for listening to Sportly. Sportly is an Immigrantly media production. This episode was produced by Sadia Khan and Shay Yu. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week and every week after for more Sportly. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.